Hello and welcome to Trees, the Silent Sentinels. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have opted to spend the next 30 minutes with us as we now go in search of trees around our beautiful island and seek to educate and inform. Once again, I pause to thank all of you for your kind words of support and your encouragement. Your constructive criticism of the program is also welcomed and encouraged. In last week's program, we looked at trees as silent sentinels for birds. This week, we shall begin with our colleague Carla Daniel as she takes a leisurely stroll through a road which traverses a cool and shady gully to be found in the central parish of St. Thomas.
Sometimes we're so busy with our everyday lives, passing through Bridgetown, Warrens, Spikestown, and Oystons, those very urbanized areas in Barbados, that we actually forget that we do have lots of very green spots. And then for a brief moment, we happen upon areas like this one. This area in Canefield, St. Thomas, is a marvelous green spot. You can hear the wind rustling through the trees. As you drive down this very narrow road and come around the corner, you enter this one spot here where you have these towering trees, and there's almost an immediate drop in the temperature. So you go from being quite warm and quite hot to almost shivering with goosebumps coming up. It is cool. There are these lovely breezes. You can hear the birds in the trees. You can see these very tall trumpet trees, palms, and sandbox trees directly alongside the road, and you almost think you're in another Barbados. And we really do need to take the time to appreciate these areas that we do have left, because they are few and far between, and they really need to be preserved. So the next time you have a few minutes to spare, maybe half an hour, maybe an hour, let's leave the Warrens and the Bridgetown areas and head a little bit closer to the center of the island, maybe in St. George, maybe in St. Thomas. But just come out and remember Barbados as it once was, and the tiny patches we have that still remain.
Well, we took Carla's suggestion and journeyed to the central parish of St. Thomas and went in search of the gully in Canefield. And yes, we experienced all of that and more. There was a sudden drop in the temperature. It suddenly became cool. Now, after being immersed in the tranquility and the greenery, and as it were, enjoying that aesthetic experience, our colleague Dr. Lennox Honeychurch called attention to a silent sentinel that sailed onto Barbados on the currents of the Orinoco River hundreds of years ago.
We are here at Canefield in this beautiful gully full of a wide variety of trees, and dominant among them is the one that we know as the sandbox tree. Its scientific name is Hura crepitans, and crepitan comes from the Latin to burst asunder, to have a crack. And this scientific name actually comes from a feature of the distribution of the tree, the way in which the tree distributes its seeds. We are familiar, many of us, with these pieces of the pod, which are usually bound together in a round formation. And when these trees dry to a certain point, the whole pod explodes. So that's where it gets its name, crepitans. It explodes, it bursts asunder, and it fires off at what is estimated to be 160 miles an hour, sending the seeds which are inside of these pods out into the landscape.
You would recall Dr. Honeychurch speaking about the pod firing off. Clearly, the creativity of our people was not lost in the naming of this tree. As Julian explains, we simply used our imagination.
Think of the persons who came to Barbados years ago, when they're walking through the trees and stuff, and they hear this loud explosion, pats. That's why it was called monkey pistol. As in, the monkey has a pistol shooting. So those are two ways of remembering this particular tree.
While the locals referred to it as the monkey pistol for obvious reasons, as you heard, the English people referred to it as the sandbox tree because of its utility, the uses it was put to.
The English name, the sandbox, comes from, and we only have a small piece of the actual full pod here, comes from the pod itself and the use that it was given in the 18th century, in the 1700s. It was a souvenir of places like Barbados where you had these pods dried, there's a space in them, and in the old days when you were writing with pens that you had to dip into the ink, this was a form of blotting paper. You would store this very fine sand here, and after you had written your letter, you would sprinkle the sand onto the wet ink and toss it off. The sand would then take the residue of the ink, and essentially it was a form of blotting paper. And this was a great souvenir, and so it was called a sandbox, and the tree from which it came was a sandbox tree. In the French Caribbean, such a tree is called a sablier. Sablier, sable, sand, so it basically has the same form of meaning.
Now, what about the pod of the sandbox tree? Do they look familiar? I'm sure you must have seen them around being used as decorative pieces for our people.
Now, in between all of these are actually just the pods that hold the actual seed.
The very distinctive seed pod. Now this seed pod, I'm not going to break this one, but once broken, you get the flat little packages that have the seed inside, and you would typically find jewelry being made from these small wooden parts. You see people putting earring backs on these, so you may get earrings. You can put them together and make necklaces.
Now, the seed inside of the pod was not to be left out. It was widely known for its cleansing purposes and used by many, as Dr. Lennox Honeychurch explains.
And the seed is like about the size of a 25-cent coin. And these seeds actually are used for a number of medicinal purposes, but prominent among them is as a laxative. So apparently one seed crushed up and swallowed acts as a laxative. But there is a danger, of course, in all of these herbal medicines of sometimes taking too much. So one has to be wary of these things.
Well, we were hoping that Dr. Honeychurch would have shared with us whether or not his mother had given him the seed to be used as a laxative when he was a child, but that was not to be. Please do remember that this program does not seek to disseminate medical advice, neither is it an implied endorsement of what Dr. Honeychurch shared. In a previous program, we were told how the sap of a coastal tree was used in the making of poisonous arrows to take out the enemy. The sandbox tree was also used similarly. In fact, it went beyond that. It is on record as being used as a lethal gas.
The sap was used as a poison. It was also used formerly in the United States of America for a poison gas in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And just like the manchineel tree, the Carib Kalinago people of the islands used it to poison their arrows. So the sap itself is very poisonous. The seeds have these medicinal qualities.
Now, you cannot mistake the sandbox tree. It is spiked, and the tree in itself has developed a special protective ability against pests.
Now the sandbox tree, as you know, is primarily identified because of the very thorny nature of the trunk. Do you see and it's very thickly thorned.
With all of these prickles from the ground up. And this is an interesting thing which also affects the early trees of the silk cotton tree, any of these with spikes, because over the evolutionary period, remember these trees that are natural and native to Barbados and the other islands actually came up with the ocean drift with the currents from the Orinoco River. They're from South America. And in South America, they had developed over thousands of years this protective ability to prevent animals such as monkeys and sloths from going up and taking the fresh fruit, eating it, and therefore nullifying the possibility of those seeds going and taking root and being propagated. And so those trees that developed spikes were able to protect their fruit. Now, when these trees came up here, there were of course no monkeys as yet, no sloths, but they maintained the pattern that they had, the natural biological formation and pattern that they had in South America. And they have maintained them on the islands.
The natural resistance against pest is quite interesting, and as you will learn, it is from this feature that the name has been derived in one of our sister islands in the northwestern Caribbean.
In Jamaica, for instance, the tree is called monkey no climb, and here in Barbados, because of the early introduction of the monkey to Barbados, there are also references to the monkey and the trees as a result. So what we find is that these spikes actually protect the tree from being occupied by animals which would in some way retard the development of the pods.
Another interesting thing about the sandbox tree, you'll also know it because of the heart-shaped leaves. So if you ever see, it's kind of an elongated heart, but you'll have a heart-shaped leaf with a midrib, a line going straight down the center, and then you'll have the veins going parallel from that line straight to the edge of the leaves.
So this tree in itself is important to us here in the Caribbean. It's a great shade tree, planted a lot in the early period of its history for the shade in public places. A lot of the marketplaces, for instance, had these sandbox trees on them.
The sandbox tree is often seen sometimes along roadsides or primarily in cemeteries close to churches. But in this lovely area here in Cane Field, we have a very high number of sandbox trees, which is actually quite unusual. In this small area just behind me, we can count a number of sandbox trees of different ages. There are at least about 15 just here.
If you have a succession of trees, what you are in fact doing is spreading the growth of these trees, as has happened along this gully here. Interestingly, we feature a lot of trees and plants that came to Barbados from other parts of the world, and during the colonial period were brought here and have taken root. They have become almost native to the island. But the sandbox tree, we have actually been exporting to East Africa. It's very well known there, and also to Australia. So here is a case of an indigenous plant from the Caribbean being taken and brought over to other parts of the tropical world.
And while many people, older people, will know the sandbox tree, a lot of the young people nowadays, unfortunately, do not know it as well. So if you do see a sandbox tree, please take the time to point it out to your children. And if they've never seen one, come down here to Cane Field in St. Thomas, and you're going to see a number of these very unique and very majestic sandbox trees here.
These sandbox trees here in the gully at Cane Field are definitely a part of both the tangible and intangible heritage of our island. They are quite inviting and of course have the potential to inspire the writing of poetry, spiritual and other inspirational pieces. The trees and the entire area seemingly calm the spirit and renew the soul. They are truly our silent sentinels, and while they continually protect us silently, we need to be vocal as we seek to protect them.
Now, I know that Barbadians love to eat bread, and we have this, which is called a sandbox. I'm sure you've seen this before, or you've gone to a bakery and asked for a sandbox, but this is what we call a sandbox bun. And this bun, it looks roughly like the sandbox in terms of in terms of the shape. And the sandbox tree, the note that you have written and you have sifted the sand over, and the sandbox bread, all of these are things that are linked to trees, and these things are part of our heritage. And then there's a sandbox tree in St. Nicholas Abbey in the courtyard.
In the book Historic Houses by Dr. Henry Fraser, now Senator Professor Sir Henry Fraser, and the late Ronnie Hughes, a section on St. Nicholas Abbey reads, "The giant sandbox tree in the back of the courtyard was sampled for carbon dating by Stephen Cave, who reported that it was over 400 years old." Trees transform our landscape and provide natural protection. Just drive around the island or assume a position somewhere that affords a panoramic view of sections of the island, and you are certain to find these sentinels playing fundamental roles in our lives and the environment. Over the years, many individuals rose in protest over the destruction of trees, and this protest action took various forms. In some instances, the protesters had themselves tied to the trees. In Barbados, we also have on record a number of protest action against the cutting down of trees. This is a sign that at least a number of us has the understanding and appreciation of the value and importance of trees to our lives and the environment. Why are trees important?
People often ask why trees are important. And there are several reasons. I will try to touch on a few of them here. First of all, trees clean our air. Trees absorb carbon dioxide, which is toxic to human beings and mammals, and they put back out oxygen. So it's a whole factory basically absorbing the carbon dioxide and generating oxygen, which we breathe and need to survive. Trees also tend to remove some pollutants in the air, various sulfites and even particulate matter like dust from the Sahara. They tend to filter it out. It will be trapped on the leaves, and with the next rainfall it will wash into the soil.
One of the major benefits that we have of trees in Barbados is that trees provide shade. If you have your house and you plant trees that can shade the walls or shade areas of your home, then your house is basically less hot inside.
So in the summer months when the sun is beating down and scorching and the fans don't seem to be producing enough wind, the shade from the trees is cooling your house. You don't have to use enough fans. You don't have to go out and spend money on air conditioning units so that you're not melting into a puddle every day. You don't wake up in the middle of the night sweating because, you know, the trees are outside. They're filtering the air in and they're keeping it very cool. And you would have seen, because we were standing outside at the entrance to Turner's Hall Woods, beginning to sweat. And I know I'm wearing these long pants and these long sleeves, and I was saying, whoo, the sun is really coming up. And from the time we stepped inside, it was almost as though you stepped into another world. You had cool breezes, and it's not just shade, because you can get shade from an umbrella. You know, when you compare holding an umbrella under your head and standing under a tree, it's two completely different things.
If you have large buildings and trees can block basically the sun from actually hitting the building, where, as scientists would say, solar irradiation hitting on buildings, then what it does is it stops the building from being hot. And that translates into something practical. It means that you have to use the air conditioning much less, and it reduces the energy cost.
And another thing that I find that trees do is that they help water infiltrate the soil. And water, we are a water scarce country. Barbadians seem to not really believe it, because when you turn on the tap, most of the time you get water flowing and you see the rain falling. But we are definitely a water scarce country. We aren't pancake flat. We have just enough elevation to encourage that water, when it does fall, to flow straight down through our gully system and straight out to sea. And once that water has entered the sea, it's lost. It's not going into the aquifers, it's not being recycled, it's gone. So what we need to do is to encourage as much water as possible to infiltrate. And we see that soil has done that a lot in the Scotland district and so on to slow down water flow. You have those Gabion wells built, you have Gabion channels and so on. But in order for the water to go into the soil or into the ground needs to be permeable. So if you have your hose on and you hold your hose over your lawn or over some dirt, you see the water, it comes out of the hose, it hits the ground and it sinks in. If it's not flowing too quickly, it sinks in. When you spout the hose on the road or on your driveway, the water runs down your driveway into the gutter, down the gutter into maybe the well at the side of the road, and it's gone. That's because the asphalt and the cement is not permeable. So the more houses we build and the more we cement over everything and we asphalt over everything, that's loss of space where water can infiltrate. So you plant a tree, what the tree does is that it breaks the fall of the droplets. So imagine you went up in a plane, you were doing skydiving, you're falling out of the plane, you pull your parachute ain't working, you start to panic, you're freaking out, oh gosh, I'm gonna die. And then somebody runs out and they have a big pillow and they place it right there. You fall straight down, you hit the pillow and you bounce. The pillow broke your momentum and it broke your fall. And the trees do the same thing for the raindrops. They're coming out from the cloud, they're traveling at great velocity, falling straight down where they would hit the ground like a bomb, you know, and break apart. Or they would join other raindrops and keep flowing, but they hit the leaves instead. That breaks the momentum, slows down a little bit. In some cases, they'll run all the way along the branches and just slowly trickle down to the soil. Or they'll fall onto the leaves and they'll roll off and they drip off the tips of the leaf. And you would stand right here in the open, raindrops pummeling you like nails, these things hitting hard. You step to the side and you're under a tree. You get little drops of water falling from the leaves. You know, there's no real pressure, there's no intensity. And that's because the leaf has broken that momentum. And what that does is that it slows it down. So when that water slowly drips onto the ground, it's more likely to actually infiltrate the soil than if it's moving fast, then it's more likely to flow over the surface and become runoff. So that's one of the amazing things that trees do. So a lot of these little wooded areas and the so-called bushy areas that we see all over the country, I'm not saying that the bushy areas don't need to be trimmed, but I'm saying there are some benefits because those are the areas where we get rainfall actually infiltrating the soil, entering the aquifers, and when we turn our taps, we have that glorious water that is delicious and safe to drink. And in order to maintain that, we need to maintain some of these areas that are open so the water can enter our aquifers. So that's another benefit of planting the trees close to your house.
And trees are very good as well at taking up what we would say bad things from the environment. Contaminants, pesticides, you know, that people use around their houses, and anything that is there in the environment, trees can take that up and keep it so that it doesn't flow from the land into the sea and affect our coral reefs. Because you know we have problems in the sea where corals are dying, and we have a situation where we want to prevent a lot of soil from going into the sea. Another benefit of trees, which we all know, we like to eat mangoes, we like to eat golden apples, we like to eat oranges, we like to eat all of these things. And where they're coming from trees. From the time you plant a mango tree from small, the minimum time it would take before a tree will bear is 5 years. So when you go and you see these massive mango trees bearing these large fruit and you are enjoying them, many of those trees are 20, sometimes 30 years old. Somebody was looking after that tree and giving it fertilizer so that you can get all those beautiful fruit. So are you thinking now, are you planting a tree so that your children and your children's children will be able to eat some beautiful fruit later on? So trees have many benefits, and we have to think of them as something that is valuable and not disposable. Yes, trees give leaves, and leaves fall, and leaves have to be raked, and leaves have to be removed. But we have to think of trees as something that is valuable and not say because a tree is giving leaves and it has roots and these roots are going to invade underneath my house and I should cut them down. What you have to do is you have to say, how can I preserve these trees, especially if it is a large tree? And then if I'm going to plant a tree, should I plant this tree appropriately so that when it becomes mature, I will still be able to enjoy the tree. Trees, in addition, give wood, which is, something that we use all the time. Barbadians use a lot of pine. They use a lot of greenheart. They use a lot of Kamikali lumber, which comes from Guyana. All of these are trees making resources that we are using up every day for our benefit. But the trees need to be replaced. If you cut down trees, then you should take the opportunity to plant another little tree in that position and look after it. Don't just plant a tree and say, well, it has to look after itself. The same way you have a puppy and you have a little bird, you don't just say, oh, there you go and look after yourself. You have to say, I have to look after this tree for a little bit until he can look after himself. So a little water and a little fertilizer, a little time and effort, and that tree will grow and it will be a benefit to you and your children and your family for a long time to come.
Thank you, Dr. Claire Durant. Well said. Now, in the 1980s, there was a national campaign for Barbadians to plant more trees. Our radio stations and television station regularly aired and televised promos encouraging Barbadians to plant more trees 30 years ago. Perhaps a similar campaign is urgently needed in Barbados again. Thank you for staying with me. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Until next week at the same time, I'm gone in search of more trees.